Welcome once again to another episode of the Loor Entertainment Podcast. I'm Andrew Southwick. Joining me today, you know him by his pronouns, that is Grand Poobah. We're talking about Loor executive John Speed. John, thanks for making the time one more time. Well, more than one more time, but one more time for right now.
Yeah, glad to, man. Glad to be on.
We've got a lot to cover today. There's been some pushback recently from some of the recent marketing campaign that Loor has put out on social media. We're going to dig into that, why the campaign, what it means, and talk about what is the Christian and biblical responsibility between humor and sensitivity and loving others as you love yourself and all those kinds of things. We're going to hit that on the show. But before we get there, John, you have a couple of items from Build a Baby and from some of your work in IVF and for life and abolitionists and so on and so forth that you want to talk about. Let me bring up one. These are, I think, cards for Build a Baby and the procedure, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Choicefor2.com. They are doing the Exposed Project with Loor. And I'm going to try to fight off my hiccups here. And yeah, so that's the first one that I want to point out. The truth about IVF. It's just a drop card. Business card size. It's got a QR code there. There we are on the back. And these are great to hand out. In fact, I was just at an IVF clinic this morning handing these out to passersby and people that were going in to the IVF clinic. And yeah, they're really great. They're a great opportunity just to get that message, get that film out there. And then the second one we have is for the procedure. That's from last year, October 31st. We released that. Kevin Sorbo voiceover with Aaron Fullen's music on there. And it's the same thing. It's got a QR code on the back. These are great just to leave like the gas pumps and the little slot for your credit card. And the next person comes along and grabs it. And hopefully they just hold that QR code up, scan it, and go watch the film. And so, yeah, it's a great way to really impact the culture and, get the message of the truth out there about what abortion is and what IVF is.
How has this work been going? I know we had Laura Clausen on one of the early episodes of the podcast, and I've seen, of course, a lot of work with IVF, and you've specifically been going to clinics and trying to save lives. How has the work been going?
I think now I've been out to an IVF clinic a total of 7 or 8 times, and we just did one this morning. And every time you go, the conversations are a little bit different. Every person and their struggle with infertility is unique. And so a lot of the same things happen when you ask questions. You get very similar answers, but how they react to that's different depending on whether they're Christian or not, whether they might be atheistic or just, non-believer in general. There's a lot of good gospel opportunities. We did have one guy say that he was going to try to talk his wife out of doing it after about a half-hour conversation, and they were just getting started with the process. So, yeah, I mean, it's been very educational for me. I used to go out in front of abortion clinics, totally different scene than going out in front of an IVF clinic, although a lot of very similar things going on. Nevertheless, it's different. And so it's a different way of approaching people and, asking questions, and just a different tone altogether.
I'm going to screw up this reference because I just saw the article in passing, and I didn't know we were going to talk about this today, which is okay. But there was, I don't know if it's an American city or European city. So I'll check it out. We'll follow up next time. But where they're talking about putting in restrictions on blocking access or blocking entrances to IVF clinics and abortion clinics. How might some of those things affect what you do? I mean, I know you've encountered resistance before, and if that were to take place, I mean, again, it's not the focus totally of today's show, but since we're talking about this, I thought it'd be good to bring it up. And are there ways around some of those restrictions? Because again, and my memory may be failing me here, but I certainly remember when they were restricting access to the church doors a couple of years ago, and they weren't saying boo about that, other than don't go in there. why don't we have the same opportunity? And you're not even blocking the access. It's not like you're forcing people not to go in, right?
Right. No. And what that is, there's a couple things going on there. On one hand, there's a law that was passed back in the 90s called the FACE Act. And the FACE law was meant to protect supposedly both churches and, houses of worship and abortion clinics from being blockaded. They never apply that to churches. You never hear of cases, but they have used the FACE Act against people that I know who've gone to abortion clinics and have actually gone inside or blocked them or whatever. And so that's what the FACE Act deals with. But I think there's another effort going on with what they call bubble zones. And they want to, up in Canada, for example, you can't come within 150 meters of an abortion clinic. It's even just to pray. So I think what you're referring to is probably something to do with that, with just saying that protesters or people standing out there trying to save babies can't come within a certain distance. They tried it in Portland, Maine a few years ago, and it failed miserably. I cannot believe that any of them would stand up any sort of real test in court. The Supreme Court has been very consistent on traditional public forum, public easement being accessible. As long as you're not blocking access, you can stand out there and talk to people. The police were called on us a couple of weeks ago right here in Fort Worth. The police were there like 10 minutes and said, listen, we talked to them. We talked to the people inside the clinic. We told them that you have the right to be here as long as you're not blocking anything, as long as you're not saying anything obscene. And I'm like, well, I'm a pastor of a church. If I say something obscene, I'm going to get fired. So he laughed about that. And that was the end of it. And like today, they didn't come out at all. So yeah, I don't know. People Satan loves to have his sacrifice of these children. And these people will try to do anything they can to try to stop us from saving any.
That is true. I was just about to add a comment to that, but I know we got to move on. So Unfortunately, we got to leave it there. We got to move on. Yeah. Okay. Now, I should mention before we go too far, I had a tree lose some of its branches and giant limbs on my studio. So those of you watching, listening, you may in a little bit hear a chainsaw in the background. That's because some friends of mine are helping me out, clearing it out. Sorry for the background noise. And I know, John, you've got hiccups. So as we talked about off air before we began the broadcast, we've got you covered on both sides in terms of random and weird noises. Anyway, but thank you for your patience. Those of you watching or listening to the podcast on that, I'll do my best to try to keep that down. Okay. Main topic for today, the latest marketing, well, maybe not the latest marketing campaign, but a very recent marketing campaign, social media marketing campaign that Loor did, centered on some very provocative statements, or maybe perceived provocative statements, and quite a bit of pushback from them. Some of them got more than others. We're going to walk through those here. I want to bring them up on the screen. Let's show what these were. One of them, let me get that off there. There we go. Stop snorting cocaine, get a free 7-day trial to Loor TV. There was another. This one is the OnlyFans. No, this one I know you brought to the recent conference you all were just at, or was that the?
Yeah, this is actually a follow-up image to the other one where it's shown, and we did this after the brouhaha over the OnlyFans, the original.
Yeah, the format of the, delete your OnlyFans account and get a free 7 days is the same thing. Mm-hmm. The next one, this one's gotten the most traction and pushback on there. Stop beating your wife, get a free 7-day trial to Loor.
Right.
Now, there's a few questions involved, and full disclosure, even this one. So there were people who responded who were offended by these posts. Now, and in full disclosure, I had a problem with one of them, particularly the wife beating one, because that's something that I came out of growing up. And so I saw that growing up. So to me, that is a sensitive area, no matter how you talk about it. I know that you and Loor, you being you, John, and Loor, are not advocating any of these things, yet it's still going to touch different nerves. So let's walk through this step by step. First, how did you come up with this campaign? What was the original basis for it?
Well, we came up with a campaign kind of like everything else we do. We just had an idea and we followed it through. The guys were at the Turning Point USA Action Con in West Palm Beach. I think it was July. And they had a booth there, and they thought it would be good. They had one of our content creators there with them, Emilio Martinez, who's a comedian. I don't know who came up with it. It might have been Emilio, but I'm not going to blame it on him. It might have been Marcus or Jason. I don't know. But they came up with a graphic that they put on the large screen TV that they had there in the booth that said, Turning Point, conference special. If you cancel your OnlyFans account, we'll give you 7 days free on Loor. Now we give everybody 7 days free when you sign up. That's the deal. It's obviously a marketing attempt. And honestly, it's a statement in that context that Turning Point USA, that particular idea was a statement. And the statement has to do with the fact that there's a lot of conservatives and a lot, for that matter, a lot of evangelical Christians. And let's just be honest, there's pastors who are addicted to porn. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of an offhanded way of saying, look, man, if you're conservative, so-called, stop paying for porn. And, what you really ought to do is sign up for Loor. It's obviously it's a marketing thing. And it's tongue in cheek, and it's meant to get some attention. Now, what was funny about that image went out. We put it on, I think, our social media platforms, and I put it on I had it as, I think, my cover photo for a while on Facebook. And no one, not one person ever replied to that and said, I'm upset about it. And then we did another one. I think one of our social media guy put together the one that started really the conversation, the brouhaha. And it was slightly different, but not, it was like a very highly pixelated image of obviously a female, not showing any nudity at all. I think actually just a headshot, pixelated, and saying essentially the same thing. And I don't know. Honestly, I'm just going to be honest with you. On that particular one, I don't get it. Like, why would anyone who's a Christian object to the idea of poking fun at porn users and saying you shouldn't do that? That's the essence of it. Stop doing that and do this other thing. It reminds me a little bit of the Apostle Paul and how in like his epistles, he would say, put off this behavior, put on that behavior. And so really it mystified me and it went crazy. And I was actually traveling to a conference last week when all this blew up, and I was getting these messages within our group chats and stuff. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? And then I see it and I'm like, what? This got by everybody the first time, but now a few people, I guess, took offense at it. And some of them started actually contacting Laura Clausen from Choice for Two and saying, can you believe they're doing this? And she's like, I didn't know I was an executive at Loor. It became kind of a joke between us, like, okay, Clausen's got an office now at Loor, and now she's the CEO, and be careful because she might fire you, right? I mean, it was bizarre. I don't really fully understand. I don't understand that one at all. Now, I do understand the wife beater shirt issue. And, but yeah, that's sort of how it got started. And it worked so well, honestly. We beat all the algorithms on Facebook, which have the thumb screws on us. People responded, and I think we got subscribers out of it. I don't know if they canceled their porn accounts or not, but I'm saying that it worked.
So this was to generate response. That was the point, to try to beat algorithms.
Right. That's always the point. I mean, on Facebook in particular, we are heavily shadow banned. And so the only way out of it is to get something going in terms of conversation. And we're always trying that. Like if you read almost any blog I've ever written, we're trying to do that. In fact, I think we did a blog about it. And I sent an email out to the email list about this first one. And I get emails back when people are mad, believe me. I got nothing on that one. And so that one came out of left field, but we kind of figured like, wow, we stumbled on something. We found something that sort of beat the algorithms. And so my wife and I were driving to this conference and we're just like, wow, this is crazy. We got to do something really nuts. We got to come up with an idea that's just super crazy, that's so obviously ridiculous that people will laugh at it and sort of catch what we're doing here, right? And so I think I said, what about that old joke that goes, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Right? Like you say, have you stopped beating your wife yet? It's a gotcha thing, right? And people do it just to kind of prove a point. And I thought, how can we do something with that? My wife just fires back, yeah, stop beating your wife and we'll give you 7 days free of Loor. And I said, text Marcus that. So just send it to him. And he did it. And that one really went, I guess, even then, because I've been traveling, I haven't looked at all the responses, but that one really blew up. And I understand, like, we're obviously not promoting looking at porn, doing cocaine, or beating your wife. But what we are doing is using that discussion to get people talking and to get people to pay attention to what we're doing, and it's a cheap way of doing it, just making a post on social media. And cheap as in inexpensive, not the other version of it. And so that's what we're doing. We're kind of laughing at it. We're trying to use humor as well, which on our platform is going to factor big. We've got some comedians who've got some stuff coming. And Christians, I think this is really illustrating the point. We're just not very good at just laughing at things that we should be laughing at.
Where then is the line of humor and comedy to where maybe we're lampooning something that maybe shouldn't be entertainment?
Yeah, but that's the whole point of lampooning something, right? It's the same thing as the Exposed series with Choice for Two and Build a Baby. You've got a whole set of 2 minutes something, 2:40, I think, satire of. There's one you could make that argument. You could say, look, infertility is extremely sensitive. However, satire communicates at a level that just gets people to rethink things because it causes them to maybe laugh at something that they wouldn't normally laugh at, but it gets them to rethink the issue. And so, like, historically, as far as like English literature is concerned, satire is considered that when you have a culture that's producing satire, it's considered one of the highest forms of literature that there is. And so back in the 17th century, when you had Jonathan Swift putting out satire, really Dante's Inferno was more or less satire. His writings were satire. They were very effective in attacking cultural ills. And so obviously, spousal abuse is a cultural ill. Porn use is a cultural ill. Drug addiction. Those are all cultural ills. One of the best ways to actually attack it is by laughing at it through satire. Same idea behind Build a Baby. And same idea, honestly, with everything Laura Clausen's ever done with the pink hair satire videos regarding abortion. So they've been extremely effective that way. And so that's another way to look at this issue.
So I'll push back a little bit on that because I think when you talk about things like porn, certainly spousal abuse, the drug use, those things, while noted in our culture as bad, I would suggest to you they haven't been taken as seriously as they need to yet in our culture. And now I'm speaking contextually. And so the problem is we've been making light of those things for too long. We don't take them seriously. The list is long of wife beaters who we herald as heroes, who we make allowances for that, or for their favorite sin. I realize we do this too. You can apply this across the board. We all make allowances for our favorite sins depending on what they do for us. So if that person or whatever entertains me, I'll look the other way on X, Y, and Z. And meanwhile, though, their families suffer. Families suffer from porn addiction. Families suffer from abuse. Families suffer from drugs and so on. And so I just wonder if I understand the point you make, that satire does point things out, and it does. But at the same time, have we just been all satire and not taking things seriously enough to really dig into that? I mean, think of the church, and we tap dance around divorce as a church. We tap dance around the sanctity of marriage, and we tap dance around, sexual sin. We're still tap dancing around sexual sin. And because we don't take it seriously, then the truth kind of gets lost. And then the truth, even proclaiming the truth, we lose a little bit of credibility as the vessels of truth because we didn't stand up when we had a chance. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think I agree with it in the sense that I think porn, drug addiction, and spousal abuse, while you could make the argument that we don't take it seriously enough. And I would make the arguments because the church doesn't preach about this stuff. I don't know. I mean, I come from a different world. We do. I mean, I hold a view of divorce and remarriage. It's higher than just about any other out there. I believe that once you're married, you stay married, period. God hates divorce, period. We don't do it. And so maybe it's because I come from that background that I'm not seeing the problem. Like I've obviously, the porn issue is something I've actually dealt with in my own life and have taken very seriously and repented of. And the fact is that, like, if you've done that, I don't think at that point, I guess for me anyway, I figure this is so obviously evil. This isn't something that's debatable. I honestly don't know anybody that would say, I think spouse abuse is a good thing. I mean, we might act that way when it comes to NFL players in particular, but I'm telling you that I don't know anybody that says that any of these things is good. And so because it's so obviously bad against what scripture says and what I think the average evangelical thinks, that it's totally mockable territory. And so I don't understand a lot of this, honestly. I don't understand why it would be bad to call.
I would say for some people, and I know I interrupted you there, but I would say for some that some you can come through some addictions, come out on the other side, as you mentioned, like porn hit your life. So I'm one where, like, again, I came out of a home that experienced violence and so on. So I do see that differently. I think some may feel like you might be dismissing or otherwise, what's the word I'm looking for? Diminishing the significance of their struggle in mocking or in a mock that comes without any context at all. And it just kind of hits right up there. Does that make any sense?
I know what you're saying, but I just can't agree with it in the sense that they need us. Somebody that's in any one of those three situations, they need us to call that nonsense out. And
they do, but I think the method of calling out matters.
Well, here's the problem. This is the issue within evangelicalism, and has been for a long time, that humor is not understood, and humor is a valuable weapon. And we have chosen not to use it for exactly these reasons, because if we use it, we might offend somebody. That's exactly the issue in the church. It's been cancel culture was in the church long before it was out in the world. And now in the world, they're all taking offense they're triggered over things. And somehow I think the church has to lead the way in, like, showing that we don't have to be offended over everything. And I know what you're saying. Let me finish this. not only now we don't need to find offense with things when we, especially when we know that that's obviously not the goal. I mean, just in the context of the way the ads came out and all of that, it's obviously not our goal to hurt people. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for 30 some years. I've dealt with people who are beaten. I had a deacon in a church that I was pastoring where I had to intervene and get the family out of there because their 13-year-old called me to get them out. And I did. I got them out. I've dealt with a lot of different crazy situations. I know exactly what you mean in terms of how it's sensitive it can be. However, I think our culture is in a very bad spot right now, in that we are all so careful about being sensitive. Nobody wants to say really anything. And I don't know how you fight back against that other than, I mean, none of this was sinful. None of this was intentionally hurtful. And if anything, I think if anybody looks at the motives of what we do, I don't think anyone could accuse us of trying to hurt people who are in those situations. But I do think that there ought to be some appreciation for the fact that we're addressing them at all. Like you said earlier, they're not being addressed. Well, in a way, this is addressing it and saying, stop doing that. And here's an alternative. And so that's the part that really I just totally get lost on. I mean, at that point, I'm like, people need to at least allow that was the motive. I mean, what's the alternative? Other than stopping beating your wife, what's the alternative? Keep doing it. And so that's where like the pushback on social media, I have a hard time tracking it.
And I would wonder if it's not so much being offended as I hear that, but it's more, okay, so when somebody responds to that or somebody says, hey, I'm not sure, that then even when you look through the comments and some of those things on Facebook, we can be dismissive to people as well. And so then I don't think that really helps the conversation, because there is something to say about, okay, that I get that this is not what we're trying to do, but here's the reason why, as opposed to just saying, well, hey, get a sense of humor, or take the stick out of your rump or something like that, because that's really the same. It's not the same. Well, it feels like the same treatment for some, because they would be dismissed for what they would say in one place, and if they would be dismissed in another place, they'll read that the same way. So it's not about. I don't think it's so much about the offensive part of it as much as it is, hey, this hit a little bit wrong. Do we then, as not even just Loor executives or whatever, but even some of our people, if we're going to start a conversation about it, is the best way to start the conversation, oh, I'm sorry you were offended, grow up.
Yeah, I don't think that's how the conversation started, though.
No, it didn't. It evolved that way, because you can see.
It evolved that way. And what my point is that when there was plenty of explanation from the earlier ad campaign, and people at that point, by the time the second one came along, they really weren't interested. They were just looking for a witch hunt. And that's another thing that's a real problem in evangelicalism, is this tendency to assume the worst about everybody else's motives and assume that it's all evil. And I saw a lot of that. I was getting some pushback even on the first ad on my own Facebook wall about it from people that I know, and people that know me and know that obviously we're not promoting porn on what we're doing. And honestly, if people choose to be offended in this culture, and I think there was a lot of that going on here, and not all of it, I'll grant that. But I think people do really need to learn to evaluate things and actually have some discernment about things like motives and what's going on here. It's worse when they know you. Believe me, it's worse when there's people that you know who are assigning these kind of motives to you. And that's awful hard to take that stuff seriously. And if they want to take it seriously, I'll just say, I mean, you sent me an email, right? And we talked about it. That's how you do it. I mean, if you have a offense with somebody's offended you, the right way to do it is to send an email and to try to talk to them individually. Social media is just a dumpster fire for this.
That was going to be my next question, obviously, is okay, so there's no way, and I think on balance, there's no way we're not going to offend somebody for some reason. There's no way you're not going to hit a sensitive topic for some reason. Let's set some expectations. What would you want? What do you want Loor customers, potential Loor customers, to do if they have an offense, if they have a sensitivity, something like that? Now, I'm not saying, hey, let me know every time your panties are in a bunch. You know, that is not productive either. But if it's something serious and substantive, and you can tell the difference, and I agree, you can tell when comments are just there to be adversarial, to be dismissive, to put down, to say, to be gotcha, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
And at the same time, you know, I would assume, I'm not moderating those chats, but I know my instinct would be to instantly write that off as well. Some of it is probably better written off. Some of it probably not better written off. And maybe there's more of an address or a conversation that needs to take place. What do you want to see from Loor customers, potential Loor customers, as Loor grows, as Loor unfolds, and you are navigating this? As you said before, and I know I'm talking a mouthful, and I'll give you the last word here, but there's the whole thing about beating the algorithms. How wild and bold do we need to be to win the algorithms? And then there's questions there. Mm-hmm. Does that cheapen it to just use it to climb the ladder? You know, sort of like we throw around the word racism all the time, even though usually we're not talking about actual racism. So we're just trying to end the argument, and we don't have anywhere to argue. We don't have a fact behind it. So we'll just call you a name and tell you to shut up. Right. Or we'll dismiss you in that way, whatever name that is. Right. Same animal. But then we can use those things to climb the algorithms, to break through, and so on and so forth. So there's that in there as well. But in that, more people are going to be upset. Sure. What do you want people to do when they're carrying that? What's the most effective way that you think? What gets through your filters? What gets through Loor's filters as in, okay, this is to be, this is a serious query. I'm going to respond seriously and thoughtfully.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a biblical concept that when you have an offense with somebody, you go to them. And so that's it. It's really that simple. Just go directly to us, send us an email. And I'll tell you, I can't speak for everybody on the team. I can speak for myself, having writing the blogs. I get feedback. Believe me, I get a lot of, if there's something that's controversial, I hear about it. I respond. My policy is to reply to every one of them, even if I think they're ridiculous. I will. And when I do, I treat it as if it's serious. Even if I think it's ridiculous, I treat it seriously. And I've spent time writing back to people, like entire page of response, and to explain it. And most of the time, I would say 9 times out of 10, when I do that, usually it just ends. Like there's back and forth, and there's an appreciation for the perspective. And usually when the perspective is given, it's over. And I think that's the way it usually is done, even in churches, when you've got church discipline issues. Most of Jesus said, go to them one-on-one. And if you don't hear you, then bring witnesses. Most of the time, church discipline, when it happens, it always ends after that first thing, after the one-on-one. Occasionally, it might go to the second step where you bring some witnesses, but usually it never goes as far as having to take somebody out of the church, because that one-to-one does alleviate a lot of different things. And so that's really how it ought to be done. Social media, I don't think I expect it. Now, on the algorithm front, like it or not, I mean, this is a business. We're not running a nonprofit. And the whole point of marketing is to be seen by people. And everybody's trying to figure out how to beat the algorithm. Even the nonprofit world is trying to figure out how to beat algorithms. And you can ask like somebody like Laura Clausen from Choice for Two how much problem they have with it. You have to be very creative to get past them. And I don't think that means you're somehow cheapening anything. I think that's just reality. Like you have to if you're going to advertise anything, you have to face the facts that social media, big tech does not want your message to be heard. And so how you get it heard is by being creative. And so people are going to have to kind of flex with that a little bit as well. That not to the degree, if we do something immoral, like if if we start putting naked people up on social media to get, of course, that's anything that's obviously sinful, push back on that. Yeah. If you see that, push back on that. But, these other things I don't see on that same level.
Well, and I'll say this, just the last couple of minutes here, we'll wrap up. But for Loor customers, one thing that I appreciated in our exchange was just you did, and I can say you did take my concern seriously. We exchanged back and forth, and it's done. I share that publicly because I want it to be an example. I want people to understand that. And as we sit here, like, again, I wouldn't do that kind of marketing campaign, but that doesn't mean we're not moving in the same direction. And I think one of the things that happens when people feel offended, or they feel like they feel insignificant or insignificantly seen in that way, it's really, we're just not heard. And so if you have a grievance that is serious, that is real, here's the perfect example. You just watched a show or listened to a podcast of that exact thing playing out, and you heard how John responded, and you heard how I responded, and think of your politics. Well, if you did this, how many grievances have you sent to Netflix or HBO or Disney and had them stand there and hear you and then respond back? And you might not always click 100% every issue, but you can say, okay, we're heard. I get it. We're not accusing each other. We can move on now from here, and we can be in good step and in harmony. Mm-hmm. How about our politicians? They'll throw you under the bus, for crying out loud, if it's advantageous to them. Loor, the commitment of Loor to following Christ in what they do. Granted, it's a business, but they're Christ followers first. They're going to treat you the way a Christ follower treats people. But I just appreciate, John, your willingness to come on, to go back and forth, to explain this. And because, again, I think it's important for people to know. And obviously that particular one, spousal abuse, it hit home for a lot of people, different reasons, some legitimately, some illegitimately. There's always that mix. But those who are legitimate, you do have a voice. You will be heard with Loor and Loor.tv. I'll give you the last word here, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, let me say this about spousal abuse, just to deal with it. Like, if it's happening, you need to, and I said earlier, I don't believe in divorce for any reason, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe in separation. And if you're being abused, you need to get out. You need to separate yourself out of that situation. You should call the police immediately, no matter what they say, no matter what your emotions tell you. Call the police, get the police involved. Make sure that your church leadership knows about what's going on, and get out of that situation for the sake of yourself and your children. And that's a serious thing. But that's why it needs to be, in my opinion, it would be that we need to mock it, because it's ridiculous. The idea of anyone beating up on another person that's in their family to intimidate them is disgusting. And anyone that does it should be thrown in jail. So, yeah, I'd
throw them a little bit further than jail. Come where I came from. But and I'll say this too: you can get out if you're in that situation, and I know because I did, and you can, and I did. I was a lot younger, and not only that, but God mercifully helped me break that chain of abuse in my family. Amen. And then that future can be yours too. And I mean that seriously. We'll wrap up here. Anything else you want to mention before we go? Housekeeping things, obviously subscribe to Loor.tv, LOOR.tv. Anything else, John?
Yeah, that's it. And get a 7-day free trial and see what it's like to get some loot and spend it. And feel that sense of accomplishment you have when you're supporting something good. And we hope you'll become longtime subscribers.
All right. Well, for John Speed, I'm Andrew Southwick. Thanks for sticking with us on this episode of the Loor Entertainment Podcast. We will see you next time.